This was an event that happened in my childhood that to this day I've never gotten over. This was around the time of my 9th birthday, and looking back on this night I was sure I may not have made it to my 10th had it gone any different. At the time, my family, one of my friends from school, Tasha, and I were visiting our family friend's cabin for a party about 15 minutes from our own. This party was large, as all the surrounding cabins were filled with other acquaintances and close friends. Everyone knew each other and everyone had kids of their own, so there were plenty of people to play with for my younger brother, friend, and myself. The cabins were off of a small gravel road that connected to a larger main paved one and was fairly secluded. In the middle of the cabins was a cleared section of forest with a bonfire pit that was the communal party grounds. Otherwise, all the cabins were separated by short trails through dense forest just large enough for pickup trucks to squeeze through. Since all the cabins were connected by this gravel road and had trails going in between, it made great territory for hide-and-seek tag, or manhunt as the older, cooler kids called it when we visited. This was a super common pastime while the adults chatted, and since all the children, including my brother and I, were well acquainted with a broad age range between 7 to 13, it was one of the only things we could all do together while still having fun. We had played hundreds of times over the many visits we shared, and it was not uncommon to hide in backyards, ditches, just into the forest, and underneath decks. We always drew clear boundaries set by the older kids to contain the many kids to a fair playing area and stayed out playing well past sunset most nights until it eventually got too dark to see. None of the adults minded us running around like this, since everyone knew everyone and the small cluster of cabins were close together, and the patches of dense forest between them were no more than 100 meters deep before you hit someone's yard. Of course, it also meant that all the children would be occupied so the parents and adults could drink and talk without inhibition. This night, however, we wanted to expand the playing field. Along with my friend Tasha, many of the other kids had friends with them, and other invitees from outside the area had brought kids along as well. It was decided that our normal playing zone was too small for our number to be fair, and so the request was made to extend to the next cabin cluster over. The adults were hesitant, as the next cluster was only accessible by going all the way up the gravel road to the bigger paved one, and then walking a good distance down it until the next gravel road shot off from it. However, with the promise to pair up and the urging of all the kids, this was permitted with the caveat we all return to our normal playing grounds before sunset. This was occurring at the time of the year where fall had set in and it was very cold in the evenings. However, the trees still had all their dead leaves, so the forests were only marginally sparser. Tasha and I were playing together as a pair in the usual cluster, but realized that the only people around were other hiders and figured it would be more fun to try and stalk taggers who were definitely in the next cluster. We held hands along the paved road just in case one of us fell into steep ditches on either side, but also for warmth as well since it was freezing. Once we got to the other cluster, Tasha and I immediately split up like spies. Tasha would scout about 50 feet in front of me and motion me forward when the coast was clear, while I watched for our taggers from behind. This continued with a few narrow escapes and a lot of running and careful scoping. These were roads and paths none of us had played on, and the new territory was thrilling, but we were sensible enough not to run into other people's yards or under their decks. This left us exposed on the road to taggers, but it was safer in this unfamiliar landscape. What happened next was so shocking that at the time I remember thinking I was making it up until my story was corroborated by Tasha and the other kids. As Tasha and I were making our way like I described down the main gravel road, we thought we heard footsteps crunching along and decided to duck behind two different cars parked on the road. Tasha was fairly far in front of me, and I lost sight of her as I crouched down behind my own car. I remember staying there for a few minutes to make sure the coast was clear, but waited for a signal from Tasha to say we were okay up ahead. Eventually, I got antsy and stood up to tell her to stop hiding. I have no idea how my instincts completely failed me, but to my horror, a large, ice-cold, rough hand sprung out to snatch my wrist. I jumped in shock and spun around to see that behind me was a tall man in a red hoodie and black beanie. He was looming over me with one hand in his jean pocket and the other holding my wrist in a death grip. I was so surprised I couldn't even scream. It was like my throat was suddenly filled with cement and my voice had become a heavy rock that sunk down into my stomach. I was frozen, just staring up at the stranger with no expression at all. It felt like hours of just staring at each other passed, both of us completely still. Even at 9 years old, I could clearly see the turmoil rolling over in this guy's face. It disturbed me to feel how he would tighten and loosen his hold on my wrist like he was contemplating something. My mind was steamrolled with panic while this continued for what I assume now was only seconds. What did this guy want? Was it his car and he was mad? Was he going to tell my parents I messed with it? Was I in trouble? Where was Tasha? Did he own a cabin here? Maybe he wanted us to play somewhere else. Finally, the silence and stillness stopped and the man grunted. It pulled me right out of my thoughts and I saw him moving his hand inside his pocket like he was fishing for something. He was fidgeting around in there and it was super distracting. I was staring at his hand wondering what was going on when I saw under the edge of his hoodie the unmistakable shape of a 5-inch buck knife tucked into his waistband on his opposite hip. At the same time I saw it, his grip firmed and he started pulling me off the road and toward the forest. Finally, my survival instincts kicked in and I immediately started to struggle, pulling against him in a losing battle due to the gravel under my shoes. It seemed to surprise him and he temporarily relaxed his hand just enough so that I could yank my arm away. He stood there and watched as I ran off down the road and toward the nearest older kids I could see. I looked back just once and in his hand was the buck knife, but I was already too far to chase. When I did find another older kid, I had them walk back with me to find Tasha, still shocked from what happened. I told them I lost her, but when we got back to the cars, Tasha immediately ran up to me and started to freak out. The older kid wanted to know what was going on, and when pressed, I explained what had occurred. The older kid swiftly walked us to a larger group of kids and made us all walk back to the other cluster and said the game was over. Then, they and 3 other older kids went around and yelled that the game was over and wrangled up the other kids. Once we were all accounted for, the older kids ran over to the adults and told them what happened. From there, everything devolved into chaos as angry parents with flashlights hopped on quads and drove off to search while other adults checked on all of us. When all was said and done, we found out that Tasha had seen the whole thing and was just about to signal to me when she peeked out from behind the car and saw the man standing behind me. She said he was actually there for a while before I got up and described the same behavior as I did. Still, quiet, hand moving around in his pocket, just looming. She had stayed hidden behind the car and said he wandered into the forest after I had left. It is only now that I'm older I understand he was playing with himself through this pocket, considering taking me into the woods to have his way and possibly kill me considering the knife. We found out later that night a few other kids had seen him walking down the paved road and sitting just at the edge of the forest on a few different occasions, but didn't think much of it. Our parents never found wherever he went, mostly due to the large gap in time between when he disappeared and when we told our parents. To this day, it remains a super repressed memory that becomes an intrusive thought once in a while. Like I mentioned, even at the time, I thought I had imagined the experience. It was too real, and though I've had times in my life where I felt worse in the moment, I get sick thinking about what would have happened. It makes me feel even worse to think about how I left Tasha and what would have happened if she had been discovered or had come to my aid. This world is full of sick, fucking weirdos. This was back in 2013 when I was living in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college on the west side near Times Square in K-Town. I was going through some tough times back then as I was unemployed at the time. I had a lot of time, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head from time to time. One night, I was feeling especially depressed, so I decided to walk to K-Town to grab a drink by myself. I'm Korean, by the way. I walked into a Korean bar and I got some weird looks from the waiter, so I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a couple of soju bottles, I was pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. However, as I was exiting out the bar, this Korean guy followed me. He looked fairly normal, just like a nice Korean guy. He told me that he saw me drinking at the bar by myself and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I get home safe. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was pretty close, but he insisted and he looked so harmless that I decided to take him up on his offer. We walked like 10 minutes, I think, and it was quite pleasant. We were both a little drunk, but I remember talking about all sorts of things, nothing personal. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. Now, my apartment was a 5-story walk-up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to open to get into the building. We didn't have a doorman at the time. I didn't think much of it and inserted the key to open the door and went in. The door takes a while to close shut, and it was my mistake for not checking before I went up the stairs. While I was approaching the second floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I literally got goosebumps all over my body, and I felt like I was in danger. As I started to pick up the pace, I heard the footsteps going faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor and I started to run up, clutching my keys in my hand. The guy started to run up the stairs as well, and I can literally hear him getting closer and closer to me. This all happened in a couple of seconds, but it felt so long. I finally got to my floor, and as I tried to open the door, I looked back and literally saw the guy's head on the staircase. I rushed to open the door, and I managed to close the door right on his face. My heart was beating so fast, and I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 a.m., and my roommate was asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything, so I decided to just go to my room and hope that he's gone home. Around 7 a.m., my roommate woke me up. She said that there was a man standing in front of our apartment door. My heart sank, and I explained the whole situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed that we were going to call the police if he doesn't go home. I looked through the peephole, and he told me that he will only go home if I gave him my number. We called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment and called me a few minutes later. She told me that she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently, he had tried to lie to the officers that I'm his girlfriend or something, and we got into a big fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I do not have a boyfriend and that she does not know him at all. The police let him off with a warning. About 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it's the police? Surely it can't be him again. I answered the intercom, and I was shook. It was him again. He said, "Just give me your number and I'll go away." I warned him that I'm going to call the police again if he doesn't leave. A couple of minutes later, I heard ferocious knocking on my door. He must have gotten in when someone was entering the building. I was so scared at that point, so I immediately called the police. Unfortunately, the guy ran away before the police got there. The worst part about this experience was that my roommate and I were so scared to leave and come back to our apartment. I would have anxiety every time I come home, worried that I might see him in front of our apartment door. For about a week, the police escorted us when we felt scared. I never saw him again, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. So, creepy stalker dude, let's not meet again. Okay, so this happened to me earlier and I don't think that I'll be sleeping tonight. I'm currently staying in a remote part of the United Kingdom and having a break from working, which means more time to pursue my hobbies. I'm currently staying in a remote part of the United Kingdom and have a break from working, which means more time to pursue my hobbies. One of those being photography. I had scoped out a creepy looking tree formation in a nearby forest and set my camera and tripod up as the sun was coming down, for that extra creepy vibe. As I'm happily taking photos, I see a woman pass the entrance to the arched trees. This woman had parked her car next to mine when I arrived. She went past a couple of times, looking at me for prolonged periods. I assume she wants to come up this path but sees that I'm taking photos, so decides to walk elsewhere. Approximately 5 minutes go by and she appears again, this time walking towards me, dragging her left side slightly with this strange limp. She stops once again and stares at me for a few seconds, then starts walking toward me again. I ask her if she's okay. I'm starting to put my camera away at this point and readying my tripod to use for self-defense if necessary because the vibe I'm getting is way off. She starts grunting at me, then stops and stares again. It's at this point that this woman is close enough for me to realize that she's actually a man in woman's clothing, with a wig. An uncomfortable moment passes and she starts grunting again, walks toward the edge of the path, grabs a pile of leaves and starts throwing them around. She grunts some more and then walks off aimlessly into the forest. I call my friend to tell her what had happened and ask that she stays on the phone in case this person comes back. I'll just take a couple more photos and then I'm out for good. For a good 10 minutes, I hear the crunching of leaves circling me in the forest and I try to convince myself that it's just wildlife. Then, silence. I take the photos and I haven't seen or heard the person for around 15 minutes, so now I assume I'm safe. I leave the path and see the car is gone. Thank fuck. However, I very quickly notice that there's a man walking toward me from the entrance. It's the same fucking guy. He has changed into men's attire this time. As he walks past me, he shoots me a grin that sends shivers down my spine. I don't scare easily, but this guy just gave me all the wrong signals. It caused this overwhelming feeling of dread to wash over me. I'm still on the phone at this point and holding my tripod over my shoulder, just in case. I quickened my pace and got back into my car. As I did so, I saw him come out of the lane I had been down, stop and look around, then start walking toward my car with intent. I video for a while and then haul the fuck out of there, driving past his car that he had moved down the road, thinking, what in the hell just happened? Limping, leaf throwing, forest stalker, I hope we don't meet again.